Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. The US Taliban talks in Doha are putatively entering the next phase, with the Taliban delegation prepared to meet and talk to Afghans. This is in quotes, a term that broadly refers to representatives of Afghan political opposition to the current Kabul government, Afghan civil society, and also those who are part of the government but who would participate in their personal capacity. A Taliban statement in this context reads thus, and I quote, "An intra-Afghan conference is planned for the middle of the ongoing month in Doha, about which the Islamic Emirate would like to clarify the following to our fellow countrymen." Now, here's the nota bene here. Countrymen essentially means Taliban cadres and sympathizers. So the first point is the meeting is a conference in which the participants will only be clarifying their views and policies and sharing their stance with others. The said conference is not a negotiation summit or meeting. The second point is no one will partake of in the conference as a representative of the Kabul administration. Just like the previous Moscow conference, any individual who's part of the Kabul administration and is listed as a participant will only participate in a personal capacity and share personal views. Once again, this means the conference was, and this is the Moscow conference, which was held in February this year, and Kabul had issued an official statement regretting that Afghan political opposition, including former President Hamid Karzai, had chosen to participate over 2 days to sit across from the Taliban delegation. The third point, as the conference is convened for the purpose of achieving peace in Afghanistan and exchange of views among various sides, any participant disliked by anyone or deemed undeserving has been introduced from their own side and is associated with them. They have not been picked by the Islamic Emirate, unquote. This again is a signal to Taliban cadres. However, while the Taliban statement considers this a conference and not negotiations, it does seem to indicate movement within the broader ambit of US Taliban talks led by Zalmay Khalilzad, US Special Envoy for Peace and Reconciliation in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, violence in Afghanistan continues with Taliban attacks and countermeasures by the Afghan security forces. What is the significance of this quote-unquote conference in Doha, and whether it is indeed a step forward is what we shall discuss today. And we have with us Dr. Mohammad Faisal, who is the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We will also be joined by Rahimullah Yusufzai, who is a journalist based in Peshawar, and Mustafa Kazemi, who is based in Kabul, is a former war correspondent and also a former military officer. Let me begin with Dr. Faisal. Dr. Faisal, what exactly is Pakistan's position in terms of both the Doha talks, the official Doha talks, and also this meeting, which the Taliban statement refers to as a conference?
Thank you very much, Ejaz. As you know, we are in a facilitative role. We are supporting dialogue. Pakistan supports an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process. So we have facilitated these meetings and this meeting too, which would be between the Americans and the Taliban, and subsequently also between the Taliban and the Afghan government in their private capacity. It is a difficult stage of negotiations. Nothing is final as yet, but we hope and we expect positive outcomes from these meetings.
So while the Taliban statement says this is a conference and it's not a negotiation summit, is it accurate to say that we have to see this as a positive development within the broader ambit of the dialogue that is going on between the US side and the Taliban?
I entirely agree. It is a positive development, and of course this should essentially lead to a formal meeting and conference. This is the initial testing of each other and familiarizing with both the parties. So it is a very, very difficult situation and a stepwise process, but I think all the steps are in the right direction for the moment.
So we are facilitating to the extent that we have got the Taliban to sit across from the US delegation, but we are not really part of what is happening there. We are being briefed by the US delegation, including Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, who was here recently. Is that all that we are doing?
That is all that we are doing. We don't want to be involved in whatever is being negotiated. It is something that has to be negotiated within Afghanistan and the parties within Afghanistan. We don't want to have any role in that. We were asked for support and facilitation that we have done, and we hope and expect that as per our time-honored stated policy, through an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned process, all the stakeholders will be able to come to a negotiated settlement.
So a common perception that has been actually nurtured over many years by various Western analysts has been that Pakistan wants to essentially be part of how Afghanistan is governed. It has used the Taliban as a leverage. And now you're saying that we are not part of what is going on. We are not concerned about how the Afghan wants to move forward. We have only facilitated to the extent that we want the Afghans to have negotiations among themselves in order to achieve peace. That is it. So that perception that was being nurtured over many years, would you say that that was a misconception, whether malicious or a misunderstanding of Pakistan's role in Afghanistan?
Entirely a misperception. Pakistan initially wanted a friendly, peaceful Afghanistan. Over the years, the policy has changed that much that even if it is not friendly, we would support a peaceful Afghanistan. So a peaceful neighbor, that is the maximum that we can aim for. And we have no desires beyond that. We have our own problems on the economic front, on many other things. We want to address them. We want to resolve them. We have no interest in reaching beyond our borders. And a peaceful Afghanistan, of course, would be a great help.
So officially, we have also stated a number of times that the Afghan soil has been used by India in order to foment trouble in what was previously federally administered tribal areas and also Balochistan. So are we still not concerned about that if, for instance, there is a government in Kabul that is also very friendly with India?
As I said, our interest is a peaceful Afghanistan. That covers this point that no attacks should be coming into Afghanistan, into Pakistan from Afghanistan, Indian sponsored. Nothing like Commander Kulbhushan Yadav or Naran base attack or many such actions, the APS school incident. So that would not be acceptable. We would want a peaceful Afghanistan, and that's about it. We have no interest beyond that.
We have no interest beyond that. That was Dr. Mohammad Faisal, the official spokesperson. Okay, let me go to Rahimullah Yusufzai. Rahimullah Yusufzai, the Taliban statement with reference to the Doha round, which they refer to as a conference, and they're very clear that this is not a negotiation summit. Do you think that nonetheless it is a positive step within the broader ambit of the US-Taliban dialogue?
I think it is a positive development, and for the first time somebody representing the Afghan government will be in Qatar along with the anti-Taliban opposition. So they will be in a way a national coalition of negotiators who all are opposed to Taliban, but they support the present Afghan system of government. So I think Taliban would be indirectly talking to government officials. I know this is a conference. It's just a conference like the one held in Moscow. And sometimes this round of talks in Qatar is referred to as the Moscow II. And that was held in February. And on that occasion also a joint statement was issued, which carried this point also that all foreign forces should leave Afghanistan and that Afghanistan should be an Islamic country. Those things were also mentioned in the joint statement. Maybe another joint statement is issued after the Qatar conference, but I agree it's not really negotiations. there can't be any give and take in this meeting, because I think, as Taliban are saying, and all others I think know this, that every delegate can talk, can present his or her views, how Afghanistan can become peaceful again. That, I think, is the idea. So you are sharing ideas, you are arguing your case, but there is not any direct talk or dialogue between the two sides at this stage. But I think this could lead to better things. This is the beginning. Initially there were no talks at all between Taliban and the US. Now talks are being held without any break since July last year. And then we had Moscow 1, where Taliban and those against whom they have been fighting all these years, they met and they agreed on a few things. So I think this is a very hopeful sign that some progress is being made in these kind of meetings.
Kazemi, you heard Dr. Mohammad Faisal. Is there something you want to say in response to the message that he has delivered very clearly?
Thank you for having me on the show. There's one very important thing in these peace talks going on. There are two sides of it. One is what we hear in the media discussed openly, everybody analyzing it. And then there's a part to it that happened behind the curtains between the leaders, between the important figures that actually lead these negotiations. I heard the doctor's comments. He says they're not interested in the type of government that would be installed in Afghanistan in the future after the peace talks. I don't think personally that is an accurate comment, because whatever sort of a government comes in Afghanistan, it actually affects all the neighbors, as is with every country. And in case with Afghanistan and Pakistan, whatever happens in the next government shape, however our relationships will be with India, if it will be allowed or not be allowed, or the way he said was used Afghan soil in the past to stage attacks or incidents as such against Pakistan activities, I think it matters. It is very important. And not being part of the peace talks would definitively mean that you got absolutely nothing to do with it. But in this case, Pakistan is assisting the Afghan government to find a channel and sit and talk with the Taliban. And I think this is a lot. The recent improvements and the change of governance, with the exception of some of the comments made by the Prime Minister.
I think if I may clarify, I think what Dr. Faisal was saying in terms of Pakistan's not being concerned about what kind of government there is in Afghanistan had to do not with the fact that, of course, if there's violence still or if there's instability, obviously Pakistan will be concerned, as will be other regional countries. But I think the point that Dr. Faisal was trying to make was simply that Pakistan does not want to come across as a country that is in any case seen to be interfering in how this dialogue process is carried forward. I think that's the main point that he's trying to make.
Well, this is welcome both by the Afghan government, the politicians, the statesmen, all the parties involved in the peace talks. Everybody welcomed this, as they said it earlier as well in a statement, I guess. But it is important. It is important what sort of government comes next in Afghanistan. Okay. It is inclusive. It is not. All these matter. They all should be taken into account very carefully.
So, Mr. Kazemi, give me a sense of, and I'm asking you this because you've been a veteran war correspondent, you've also served in the military and worked for the UN and NATO. What exactly is the state of the Afghan National Security Forces? We hear a lot, stories about a lot of attrition, the problems of fundings, the training problems. There were also reports that if the funding sort of, comes down or dries up, then it will be extremely difficult to maintain the Afghan National Security Forces. Is there any plan, if something like that happens, for the Afghan government to be able to sustain the Afghan National Security Forces with its own revenues?
Yes, and the NATO has pledged long-time support for the state of Afghan security forces, and Afghan revenues are enough to sustain the Afghan forces in case there is a sudden drawdown. There is no such thing as a sudden drawdown or a cease of support by the NATO or other allies supporting the Afghan security forces, because the matter of any shortcomings within the lines of Afghan security forces, it will be directly a threat to the world security, because whatever they will come short of in doing on the battlefield will be something that would threaten a city, a state, a country somewhere in the world. We're discussing a matter of global terrorism. This is not an issue of home violence. It is something that can easily, like a virus, spread to the world. So there's no worry about that. There's also just one further thing, and that is expanding the Afghan forces. There have been worries expressed off the record by officials from the government of Pakistan over the past 1 or 2 years, that if the Afghan security forces grow anything near what the state of Pakistan security forces in terms of air force or other elements, that Pakistan have a little further of year with them, is worrisome. I don't think this is anything of that sort, because having a strong force, I haven't heard Pakistan expressing any such concern. No, we have had off-the-record comments discussed in meetings within the Afghan and Pakistani officials saying that, okay, if you have a strong air force, what are you going to do? How are you going to use it? Self-defense is a lawful act, and it's in need of every country. And I don't think there is going to be a worry for that matter, because a safe Afghanistan means a safe Pakistan as well.
Mr. Kazemi, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I completely agree with you that as a sovereign, independent state, Afghanistan has every right to do what it wants to do, of course. But I'm not sure if these off-the-record comments by the Afghan officials are accurate, because Pakistan, in terms of its professionalism, integrity, and training, is at a very high level. I think as a former military officer yourself, you must have watched with some amusement the latest military round that was played between India and Pakistan. So I don't think we are particularly concerned about the Afghan Air Force or what Afghanistan wants to do with the military. But the question that I want to ask you is that now there are reports, given the rate of attrition of the Afghan National Security Forces, that the casualty figures are now being kept secret by the Ministry of Defense. Now, that is, of course, a worrisome development. Won't you agree?
There is a matter within the national defense lines of every country. I wouldn't know about it because I'm not active duty officer. They probably would have any justification for themselves to keep those figures low. But casualties, desertion, these numbers have been going high in the past 3 years, 4 years, especially since President Ashraf Ghani took over the government, especially the casualties and desertion of the army. These two figures have gone up very high, and that is something that even I would believe NATO has expressed concern over it last month, and asked the Ministry of Defense to seriously address this issue, as well as President Ghani himself.
So can you give us a sense of why desertions? Is this because of the rate of attrition? Is it because of lack of money? Is it because of some kind of ideology? Why are there so many desertions after, someone comes in, goes through all the training and deployment and the rest of it? So what factors would you ascribe this rate of desertions too?
There are several factors that we can attribute this pattern of desertion to it, but out of most important, one or two that we can discuss, one is the salary levels at the Afghan National Army. We have a percentage that I cannot recall exactly of the Afghan soldiers who have joined the lines, the conventional forces, who have joined the lines of Afghan Army, Afghan police, only for the salary to make a living. They've gone through the rigorous trainings, resources have been spent on them. They became soldiers, cadet officers, and enlistees. And after a few months, they would see that if they have a better job offer, they would go somewhere else and use the same training given to them by the government elsewhere. The Afghan government needs to take serious measures to prevent this. If it's by increasing the salaries, if it's by putting more discipline, making more strict rules, follow-ups, making matters legal, putting it into a judiciary frame in case a soldier deserts. I believe one thing easy for them right now is that there's no lawful follow-up pursuit to them. If they leave the army, they're not scared to be hunted down or gone after by the police or the military police. But if there is a mechanism like this, and they would fear that if I desert the army, I will be brought to trial, I will face a judicial court for committing a crime, which is according to the military law, the desertion numbers will definitely come down.
But here's the problem finally, which is that A, the number of desertions are very high. And the government will be spending more resources to actually hunt down the deserters. And secondly, improving the salary is something which requires deeper pockets. And that is the problem here, because a lot of funding is coming from outside. And the funding is also kind of drying up because there's very little appetite in the world now that especially the United States wants to get out, to keep filling the Afghan coffers. That's the problem. Won't you agree?
It becomes a problem when the support gets pulled out, but actually the financial aid will keep flowing to the Afghan security forces. One. Second point is that going after deserters, it does not require any special resource that would be put into use. There are lines of military police who are responsible for discipline and order within the military frames. They are already appointed. They have their duties cleared. So if an officer, a soldier deserts the army, you find out about it, you pull up his file, you find his address, hometown, all of it. You send it to your relevant units, and you find the man back, unless he flees the country. And it is still a matter of, systematically making the passports blacked out and all that stuff, which were a little new on that, but it doesn't require much resources.
Okay, thank you so much, Mustafa Kazemi, talking to us. Rahimullah Yusufzai, you were hearing Mustafa Kazemi, and I'd asked him about the Afghan National Security Forces rate of attrition, the casualties. He also talked about desertions. So the Afghan National Security Forces are under tremendous pressure. And of course, the government in Kabul is being accused of incompetency. So this entire scenario for the Kabul government does not really look very optimistic. Would you agree with that?
I think President Ashraf Ghani himself is on record saying that since 2014, when he became the president, 45,000 Afghan security personnel have been killed. These are very high figures. And he also said that if the international assistance dries up, then his security forces will collapse in 6 months. And Afghan officials, before this ban was imposed on keeping the figures secret, the figures of casualties, at that time they were conceding that their losses are very high. And US and NATO military commanders have always been saying on record that these kind of losses are unsustainable. So it's no longer a secret, and when you start losing that high number of soldiers and policemen, then it demoralizes rest of the forces. It creates concern, then I think the recruitment also goes down because not many people would like to end up being killed while serving in the armed forces. So this is something which has been happening for years now, and the desertion rates have always been very high. Even before these very high number of casualties, the casualty rates have been very high. Maybe they have gone even higher. I think these are the kind of problems which are being faced by the Afghan government and their foreign, patrons. And they're all concerned about it. I think they are trying to overcome this problem. It's not going to be easy, as you mentioned, lack of resources, lack of proper training, and the fact that
and lack of motivation also. But this brings us back to the idea of talks, why talks become so important. But then the Taliban obviously are playing a much stronger hand compared to the other side. Nonetheless, as we discussed earlier in the first intervention, you agree that it's a positive development. Now, give us a sense of what exactly is likely to transpire during this conference in Doha, because we're going to have the Afghan political opposition, we are going to have people from within the Kabul government, but in their personal capacities, and we're also going to have Afghan civil society representatives sitting across from the Taliban delegation. Now, this is going to be an Afghan show, and this is essentially to get each other's point of view. So tell us, considering that you keep a very close watch on these developments, that what is likely to happen during this conference?
Right now we have got these two tracks. One, since July last year, the Americans are directly negotiating with Taliban. And they both sides are saying they have made some progress, which is very reassuring. And then we have this intra-Afghan dialogue, the second round. The one was in Moscow in February, and now we will have even a bigger one, I think, in Qatar. I think one track will reinforce the other. If some progress has been made in the Taliban-US dialogue, that will create hope, that will reinforce the intra-Afghan dialogue. Because if Taliban have conceded something, like saying that Afghanistan soil will not be used for attacks against any other country, or the Americans saying that they will withdraw. So I think these two very important points will now be out of the way. Only the draft will be finalized, the timetable of withdrawal will be finalized. I think this will actually help the Afghans who are going to meet at this conference in Doha. So that's why this is a very positive development. And if there is some progress in the intra-Afghan dialogue, this will again reinforce the Taliban-US dialogue. So I am very, hopeful, because, initially nobody even thought that the Americans would agree and negotiate directly with Taliban in the absence of the Afghan government. And then we didn't, we were not, really very optimistic that Taliban would talk to the Afghan government.
But now things have begun to move, which, as Rahimullah Yusufzai said, is a positive development. Thank you so much, Rahimullah Yusuf, for being with us. I'm also joined by Najib Sharifi from Kabul, who's a former journalist and is a member of Afghanistan Analysis and Awareness, a Kabul-based think tank. Mr. Sharifi, thank you for joining me. Give me a sense of what you think of the upcoming intra-Afghan dialogue in Doha. Do you think within the broader ambit of the official dialogue between the United States and the Taliban, this is a positive development?
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, of course, it's a positive development. It's actually in the past 18 years, this is the most serious and meaningful, negotiations that we are having with the Taliban. It obviously started with the Americans directly negotiating with the Taliban, and the second stage, the Taliban and the members of Afghan delegation are going to come together and discuss key issues. Again, I would like to repeat, there's a very positive development, but we have to remain extremely cautious in terms of our optimism, because the peace in Afghanistan is a very, very complicated subject, and it would remain lengthy, and we should not expect miracles from
Absolutely, I totally agree with you, but I completely agree with you. Obviously, this is a very complex issue, and it'll be, it's not going to happen overnight or something, but do you think it's important for Afghans, various stakeholders, not just the Taliban, to actually talk to each other, present their point of view, hear the other side's point of view, and then try and find some common ground?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a very significant progress. And this is actually the first opportunity or platform where the Taliban and members of different sectors from Afghanistan will come together and present their points of view. Because in the past, we have never had such an opportunity where they come together and frankly talk what do they really want. For us here in Afghanistan, still, the Taliban position is kind of like unclear, because, well, they obviously state that they withdraw, the foreign troops need to withdraw from Afghanistan, they want a religious-based, state in Afghanistan, but that's not properly defined. What if a Sharia-based state is what the Taliban want? What does that really mean? How would they spell this out? So this is going to be a very, very important gathering where the two sides will raise their points of view in an effort to find a common ground, which, again, I believe is going to be a very lengthy process.
So last time in February this year, when there was a Moscow round, the political opposition was there, and the Kabul government said that it regretted that the political people, even though the opposition political figures sat across from the Taliban, but in Doha, there will be people from the Kabul government, but in their personal capacity. So would you also consider that as a positive development?
Of course, because the Moscow conference was an important event, but there was a big shortcoming of Moscow conference was lack of the presence of the representatives from Afghan government.
Correct.
Which made it kind of like deficient, because if we really want to talk peace with Afghanistan, the Afghan government and their representatives need to be included.
Absolutely.
And in Moscow, it didn't happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Najib Sharifi, for speaking with us. We shall take a short break. At the other end of the break, we will discuss the ongoing crisis between Turkey and the United States over Ankara's decision to go ahead with the S-400 purchase from Moscow, a deal that could plummet US-Turkey relations further. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. The leaders of the US Senate Foreign Relations and Armed Services Committees have warned Turkey that it risks tough sanctions if it continues to pursue plans to purchase Russian S-400 missile defense system. They have also threatened further legislative action. By the end of the year, Turkey will either have F-35 advanced fighter aircraft on its soil or a Russian S-400 surface-to-air missile defense system. It will not have both, is how they put it in a New York Times opinion column. Turkey, for its part, has said that it will look elsewhere if the US doesn't sell it F-35 Lightning II or Patriot air defense system. Turkey signed the agreement for purchase of the S-400 system in 2017 and has stuck to its guns. What is Ankara's fascination with S-400? Turkish analysts cite missile threats from Syria and Iran refer to S-400's capabilities against missiles that can be launched on lofted or depressed trajectories in a network-centric war scenario with complex sensor-to-shooter linkages. The modern A2AD systems work on the principle of any sensor best shooter, which essentially means that sensors skew data intensively while the best interceptor of the layered defensive configuration engages the threat. But is this all? Is it worth being sanctioned and taken off the F-35 program, of which about 7% parts are made by Turkish manufacturers? What impact could it have on Turkey being a NATO member? These questions are also important because while Turkey's relations with Russia have improved since the Turkish Air Force shot down a Russian plane in Syria, Russia has its own interests in the Black Sea and Syria, and they do not necessarily converge with Turkey's. To discuss this, we have with us Oubai Shahbandar, who is the World Defense Analyst at TRT World. Mr. Shahbandar, thank you for being with us. What is Turkey's fascination? This is a system. Is Turkey going to juxtapose acquisition of a system with its overall relations with the United States and also being a NATO member?
Absolutely. Well, this is certainly unprecedented in terms of the future for NATO. Turkey, of course, is a very valuable NATO ally and is a strategic partner with the United States. But when I say unprecedented, this is the first time that we've ever seen senior members of Congress and of the Senate, both Republican and Democrats, publish an op-ed essentially threatening sanctions that could severely impact a fellow NATO ally's economy. So what is at the heart of the matter here? One, Turkey, as any country, has the right to defend its airspace. It operates in a very dangerous region. Turkey, of course, is leading counterterrorism operations in Syria. So how can it defend its airspace? It needs an integrated air defense system. And now the Russians, when it comes down to it, were able to offer Ankara a better deal than the Americans. The Americans wanted Turkey to buy their Patriot integrated air defense system. Discussions between the White House and Ankara were ongoing, but at the end of the day, Turkey said that the conditions that they were looking for, which is joint production and technology transfer, were not being offered by the United States. Moscow came in and said, we can offer you the advanced S-400 integrated air defense system, and we can deliver it fast. The first missile battery is expected here in the next few months before the end of the year. And now there's potentially going to be major repercussions. Of course, Turkey's invested billions of dollars along with NATO in the production of the F-35 as a joint production program with other NATO member allies. In fact, Turkey produces a key electronic component of the F-35, and 2 F-35s have already been transferred to Turkey as its pilots continue training in the United States. So for senior members of Congress and the White House threatening to essentially cut off Turkey from the F-35, which is already paid for, is certainly unprecedented and does not bode well for the future of the NATO partnership.
So this is now a binary position. Turkey saying, well, and as you also mentioned, that we've got serious threat here. We also a sovereign state, and we need to do whatever we can possibly do to counter that threat. But simultaneously, there are the US concerns that you cannot integrate two systems which are totally different. The Americans are concerned about the fact that through the S-400 networks, the Russians could use the backdoors and get the information on the capabilities of F-35, and that, by all indications, and we've spoken with experts and lots of people have also written about this, that this is a serious and viable concern. So how does Turkey actually going to deal with this? Because it is one thing to say that we are going to go somewhere else, but quite another thing to also be able to stay within NATO. There is, of course, also the threat of sanction under CAATSA. There's going to be, if the US decides to outsource the 7% parts that the Turkish manufacturers are making for the F-35, then that's going to be a huge setback for those manufacturers also. So this is not a very simple proposition here. Absolutely. Now, look, there are some very valid concerns expressed here on the technical side
by the United States when it comes to the S-400 and the potential for the S-400 to be used by the Russians to somehow gain access to sensitive technology that's in the F-35. The F-35 is an highly advanced weapon system. There's a reason why they call it a next generation warplane, because it has extremely complex and advanced technical components and sensory suites. So there's some very valid concerns by the U.S. and other NATO member countries that somehow if the S-400 was plugged in to Turkey's broader network, which is, of course, based on NATO configurations, that somehow the Russians can gain access. Now, Turkey has come back and said that they can find a compromise, that they can work with the United States to negotiate a technical agreement where the S-400 would be a standalone system, that there would be essentially an electronic firewall between the S-400.
But Mr. Shahbandar, I want a clarification here, because obviously in the know of the fact that the ground air defense systems and the aerial platforms are always integrated in network-centric warfare. So to have a system where Turkey's ground air defense, which would comprise S-400, and its aerial platform, which, if you get the F-35 Lightning II, is not really an optimal air defense system.
May not be optimal, but it is very much feasible. In fact, Greece, another member of NATO, does it with their S-300 system. So where there's a will, there's a way. This is really more of a political issue than really one of technical integration. Now look, there's no question that NATO operates as an alliance, which means you need interoperability. You need NATO members from one part of Europe to be able to integrate and operate with other members of NATO. And certainly not having that interoperability can make things more difficult, but it's not necessarily impossible. So we've seen precedent, for example, in other countries in the Middle East that hedge, that buy both Russian weapon systems and NATO-configured weapon systems. Now, they may not be members of NATO, but they are able to operate. So there's always a technical solution and compromise that can be found to deal with the interoperability issue. But again, this is ultimately a political matter. That it's all about geopolitics. When we're talking about foreign military sales, you can't take the geopolitical component out of here. So while the Trump White House may be trying to find a solution with President Erdogan on the way forward, Congress is stepping in. And if they enact CAATSA sanctions, it could certainly mean the end of the F-35 deal, and it could lead to a significant downgrade in bilateral relations between the two countries, if that worst-case scenario happens.
I tend to agree with you on the issue of its being a lot of politics involved in this. Could it also be that the U.S. fears that if it allows Turkey to go ahead with the S-400 purchase, that many other states would follow suit, and it will also have an impact on the theater high-altitude air defense system, the Patriot, that the American companies make?
Well, it's very interesting here because, Russia is trying to compete with the United States when it comes to foreign military sales, and that's a huge multi-billion-dollar market. Now, as it stands right now, the U.S. defense industry is the largest foreign weapon supplier to Turkey. Russia obviously wants to change that. We've seen the Russians attempting to enter markets that the U.S. has traditionally been dominant in terms of its weapon sales. Now, Russia is able to sell its weapons to foreign countries much easier than the United States. The United States is a much more complicated process. There's a lot more rule of law and checks and balances. So that obviously makes it less competitive in many ways. But at the end of the day, the F-35, there is nothing like the F-35 in the world. And in terms of how effective it is as a weapon system. And that's a reason why Turkey wanted to purchase this weapon system. And also we have to remember NATO is a joint alliance based on defending Europe from a common threat. Historically, that common threat has been the former Soviet Union, now the Russian Federation. And of course, that's still viewed as a major threat by Vladimir Putin. So Vladimir Putin is certainly going to enjoy any opportunity that he can to put a wedge between NATO allies. And Congress may be playing right into that game.
So now here's the problem. You got the one aerial platform, which is the next generation platform, and then you got an A2AD system, which is considered to be the world's best. And with the Congress coming in, where do you think the resolution lies? Do you think President Trump's administration will perhaps prevail upon the Congress and have some kind of compromise with Ankara, or going to go further downhill?
Well, certainly we hope that at the end of the day that cooler heads will prevail, that diplomacy will prevail. We do know that sensitive negotiations are taking place. Previously, we heard that Vice President Pence was involved in this process, was taking the lead in this process. Now, possibly Jared Kushner may also be involved in these sensitive negotiations. But we've seen this time and time again where the Pentagon and members of Congress have tried to tie the hands of President Trump. We do know that President Trump has a very cordial relationship with President Erdogan. But at the end of the day, Congress has the power of the purse, as it were. With the separation of powers in the United States, Congress has a significant amount of power to impact foreign relations, and it can do that via sanctions, whether or not President Trump wants that to happen or not. So now it's going to be a question of whether President Trump can sit down with both Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and the Senate Armed Services Committee and convince them that this deal is a win-win, that the F-35 deal is a win-win, that we can find a compromise with Turkey, even if it buys the S-400. Now, let's remember, Turkey has said the S-400 is a done deal. Money has already been placed. They're expecting delivery soon. So we have to really move forward with the anticipation that Turkey is going to receive the S-400. So now the ball is in Washington's court on whether or not it wants to continue a strategic partnership with Turkey as a critical component of NATO, protecting the flank of NATO from a variety of threats, both Russia and on the counterterrorism front, or whether or not it wants to give in to more narrow political interests that at the end of the day means less jobs, it means impacting geopolitical relations and making the NATO alliance much less safe.
Well, certainly the ball is now in Washington's court. Thank you so much. Mr. Oubai Shahbandar was giving us his analysis of where things stand. This is all for this week from Indus Special. We shall see you next week. Until then, it's goodbye.